Most cities raised children. Sparta tried to breed citizens. Did a Greek city-state really inspect newborns, permit wife sharing, and shape desire itself to engineer a warrior society? Settle in. Tonight, we walk into the quiet, guarded rooms of ancient Sparta. Not the clashing shields and scarlet cloaks, but the cradle and the bedchamber, the rules whispered at night, the fingers that pried in a private life and called it patriotism. We'll explore what classical authors claimed about Spartan eugenics. The inspection of infants, the engineered marriages, the training of girls to become strong mothers, the famous Agoge that turned children into men who spoke little and killed quickly, and the intricate social penalties that managed who could marry and who could not. Along the way, we'll separate what some sources say from what archaeology and modern historians can support. We'll ask how a society obsessed with military excellence tried to control birth itself, and why the same policies that built Sparta's legend also helped break it. Expect a quiet journey through law codes and lullabies, rituals and rumors, ethics and echo. We'll end where the myth begins, with the truth that no society can control life without paying a price. Imagine the light of the Eurotas River before dawn. Mist lifts from the reeds. In the distance, Mount Taygetus stands like a jagged wall, and behind it a theory of life. Strong bodies, shared discipline, and the absolute, humming fear of being outnumbered by your own laborers. Sparta's citizen core, the homoioi, the equals, were a small, militarized elite sitting atop a large population of helots, unfree agricultural laborers, and a ring of free but subordinate neighbors, the perioikoi. Every decision, including how and when to make babies, moved in the shadow of numbers. The Spartans conquered Messenia early on and turned its people into helots. Their food, their strength, their identity all depended on keeping a high ratio of soldiers to laborers. What do you do when your state is a knife's edge? You try to breathe on the blade, to shape the edge itself. Many of the details we have about Spartan breeding come from writers who admired or criticized Sparta centuries after its supposed founding reforms. Xenophon, who loved Spartan toughness. Plutarch, who wrote moral biographies with a taste for anecdote. And Aristotle, who judged laws by how they served the polis. These men were not Spartans of the classical age, and they did not agree on everything. But taken together, they describe a society that tightened its hand on the moment of birth and refused to let go. It's important to acknowledge what breeding experiments means in this context. We're not talking about laboratories or gene theory. None of that existed. We're talking about a state that treated the private lives of its citizens as public property, inspecting infants, organizing marriages for fitness, allowing extraordinary sexual arrangements to maximize good offspring, and raising children in a comprehensive training program designed as much for the womb as for war. Picture a house of mud, brick, and timber. A woman with braided hair. A man who does not live there full time because he eats nightly in the public mess. Even here, in the whisper between two people, the city is present. A law's shadow darkens the bedroom as much as the battlefield. To see how you breed a citizen, you start before birth, with a lawgiver and a plan. The Spartan story often begins with a name, Lycurgus. Some say he was a real reformer. Some say he's a myth. Either way, classical authors use him as a screen onto which to project the system that defined Sparta. And at the heart of that system was a lacework of laws designed to mold bodies before they formed. Xenophon's Constitution of the Lacedaemonians praises Lycurgus for giving Sparta a radical attitude toward marriage and sex. Where other cities arranged marriages by wealth, he says Sparta arranged them by fitness. Girls were to exercise, running, wrestling, throwing the discus, not for frivolity, but to harden them and prepare their bodies to bear strong children. Boys trained too, of course. But here is the unsettling twist. By entering the private sphere and commanding women's bodies in the name of public health, the law made the womb a military asset. If that sounds cold, listen to the practical reasoning. If you marry very young girls to much older men, as many Greek cities did, you risk stunted mothers and sickly babies. So Sparta, according to Xenophon and Plutarch, delayed the marriage of girls so that they matured physically. Men, too, were supposed to wait until their prime. The pairing of ages was calibrated for vigor, not convenience. The goal wasn't romance, or not primarily. It was offspring. He prescribed best for begetting children, Xenophon writes almost clinically. And then there were the extraordinary exceptions. Some sources say Lycurgus allowed husband sharing under strict conditions. An older or distinguished man might grant a younger, robust man access to his wife, not casually, not publicly, but with the aim of producing superior children. Similarly, a man of excellent qualities, but without the means or opportunity to marry might be permitted to father children with another's wife, again with the husband's consent. This is jarring to modern ears. But in a culture where the citizen body's quality and number mattered more than individual jealousy, the rules sought to channel biological desire into what the state decided was a public good. Was this common? Hard to say. Xenophon, writing with admiration, emphasizes the rational outcome over the emotional cost. Plutarch, centuries later, preserves stories of wives shaved and dressed as men on the wedding night, of husbands visiting secretly at first, supposedly to intensify desire and to prevent complacency. Aristotle criticizes Spartan marriage customs in a different register, noting problems of inheritance and a concentration of property in the hands of women that emerged later. But about the principle of controlled reproduction, the sources converge. Sparta saw marriage as a civic act, and Spartans believed that better bodies came from better pairings. Imagine the social skill this required. On one hand, a husband's pride. On the other, an austere ideal. Your wife is also the city's, your seed a resource to be directed. How many men complied? How many women consented? The texts are often silent. When they speak through elite male voices. And yet woven through is a recurrent moral. The Spartan household was engineered for ends beyond its walls. Ethically, we should pause. It is one thing to admire collective sacrifice, another to sanctify the invasion of intimacy. A society may decree that jealousy is selfish. But what happens to tenderness under surveillance? We will return to that. For now, mark the structure. Sparta's breeding plan began with controlled ages of marriage, with physical training for women, with legal space for reproductive exceptions, and with an ethos that whispered into beds, do not love only for yourself. Love for Lacedaemon. Cold? Yes. Calculated? Absolutely. Effective? Maybe. But a blueprint on paper means nothing unless you police the very first breath. Here is the darkest scene. A newborn in a midwife's hands. The soft pad of a tiny foot on a warm palm. And then a door opens. Plutarch, our richest source for these stories, says that in Sparta, when a child was born, it was not left to the father's judgment to accept or expose the baby, as in many Greek cities. Instead, elders of the tribe, senior men, inspected the child. If the infant was well-made and sturdy, they ordered it to be raised. If deformed or weak, they took it to a chasm near Mount Taygetus, the apothetai, the deposits, and left it. Nature would decide. We need to be careful with this. Many modern scholars argue that this lurid picture of mass infanticide at Taygetus is exaggerated, perhaps even fabricated in its details. There's little archaeological evidence for a baby-dumping chasm. Human bones found in a nearby ravine likely date to different contexts, even adult victims. Infanticide and exposure were grimly common across the ancient world, but not necessarily in the sensational, Spartan-only manner Plutarch describes. So, some sources say Spartans routinely left unfit infants at a cliff. Others, reading the same text against material silence, caution that exposure probably happened, but the theater of Taygetus may be a later moralizing flourish. What matters for our story is the principle. Whether at a cliff or at a threshold, the city claimed the right to judge a life's worth at birth. The elders' inspection was an act of eugenics in the original Greek sense, selecting for good birth. Did they throw away sickly girls more often than boys? The texts don't say, though in a society that prized soldiers, one can imagine biases. Yet Spartan women were indispensable as mothers and property holders, especially as the citizen population shrank in later centuries. The calculus was not simple. And then there's the Hella question. The state made no effort to inspect Helid infants for fitness. It treated them as laboring bodies, not civic assets. The gulf is chilling. The polished efficiency of citizen breeding sat atop a brutal system of unfreedom, where a different kind of reproductive control prevailed. You needed helots to reproduce to maintain the workforce, but you did not care to cultivate them. If eugenics is a state's way of deciding which bodies matter, Sparta drew that line with a sword. Assuming a child passed inspection, the next experiment began. How to raise not merely a healthy body, but a certain kind of soul. Whose hands? What food? What words? Here, the Agoge enters part school and part wireframe of character, designed to sculpt desire and silence in tandem. Before we go there, pause on the breath of the infant who lived. Warm milk, a name chosen, a mother's heartbeat in a house that also belongs to the city. The next test is coming. Those who passed were not spared. They were only admitted to the second experiment, childhood itself. The Agoge, a word that sounds like grinding stone. It means leading or guidance, and in Sparta, it was total. Boys entered a state-run system around the age of 7. They lived in herds under older youths, slept together on reed mats, went barefoot, wore minimal clothing, and were deliberately underfed to force cunning and courage. They were taught to steal food and beaten if caught, not to punish the theft, but to punish clumsiness, a lesson in stealth for war. They were trained to speak laconically, to endure pain without complaint, to sing and march and stare with a stillness that unnerved their enemies. All of this is familiar. The Agoge also worked on the body as a future reproductive instrument, hardening boys under the sun, inculcating discipline, creating glossy, muscular frames. These were not only soldiers' poses. They were also theater for women. Festivals featured naked dancing and choral contests where youths exhibited their vigor and girls their fitness. Songs praised bravery and mocked cowardice, forming a chorus of values sung over the ears of people not yet wed. Desire was not privatized. It was public, curated, and used. And the girls? Here, Sparta really differed. Sarah Pomeroy, in her study of Spartan women, points to the unusual openness of female physical training. Girls ran, threw, wrestled, and appeared in public far more freely than their Athenian counterparts. They were fed well. They shouted encouragement at boys in competitions and could shame cowards with song. Xenophon frames all this through the lens of breeding. Healthy, strong mothers make healthy, strong babies. There may be more to it, festival religion, civic identities, but the reproductive rationale is explicit in our sources. Some sources say that Spartan brides shave their heads and wore men's clothes for the wedding night, and that the husband visited secretly at first, slipping away from his communal meals to steal moments with his wife. Plutarch, careful and theatrical, claims the secrecy kept desire sharp, made the marriage sweeter, and kept the body burning hot with longing, supposedly better for conception. The husband does not settle into domestic life. He pays visits like a lover for some time. It's a striking image, a married couple acting like illicit friends because the city requires him elsewhere at night. Love, by decree, becomes a persistent chase. Were these customs universal? They are reported centuries later. Skepticism is reasonable, but they fit a logic the sources repeat. Regulate contact, temper appetite, then release it with intensity. Don't let the body grow fat with habit. Keep it lean, hungry, and thereby, the thinking goes, generative. Whether that produces better babies is doubtful. It certainly produces a mood, taut, controlled, always under watch. Mentorship mattered too. Older youths paired with younger in relationships that were educational, often idealized as chaste and elevating, though some sources acknowledge sexual elements. In Spartan ideology, the senior partner was to instill virtue, courage, and self-control, not exploit. Desire and instruction braided together, channel libido into excellence. Later interpreters took this as a kind of character breeding, a culture teaching its next generation how to want. If you were a coward in this world, a tresses, one who trembled in battle, the city marked you. Later, when marriage came, you would face humiliations, visible signs of disgrace that made finding a partner harder. If you couldn't win honor, you'd struggle to pass on your name. The Agoge didn't end at 18. Its judgment followed you into your bed. Now, what of individuality? Of gentle boys who didn't want to steal? Of girls who bristled against running in a dusty square? They existed. We have hints of boys who failed and were flogged, of others who sought different lives. But the machine's noise was loud. It sang the same notes every day. Even the songs used in training were simple, easily learned, and repeated until they fused with breath. And this, too, was part of the breeding plan, not simply to shape bodies, but to compress selves so that the city's purpose could live in your limbs. Sparta did not only breed bodies, it curated bloodlines. You could be strong and still fail the next test, belonging. In Sparta, not everyone could marry a Spartan in a way the city recognized. The term homoi, the equals, referred to full citizens, men of equal status who contributed to their messes and had completed the Agoge. Their wives, drawn from citizen families, were the mothers of future soldiers. To fall out of that circle, by poverty, by loss of property, by disgrace, was to risk unsuitability as a mate. Sparta mandated that each citizen contribute to the syssitia, the common meals. Fail to pay your share, and you might lose citizenship status. Property was tied to this, and property was tied to marriage prospects. Over time, property concentrated. Aristotle says many Spartan lands ended up controlled by women through inheritance, creating a demographic and economic paradox. The citizen body shrank. There were fewer eligible men, fewer marriages among equals, fewer babies born into full status. A breeding program built on strict lines began starving itself of candidates. The state's response was not to relax its sense of who counted, but to add layers. Consider the Trezzanis again. A man branded a trembler bore marks of shame. He might have to wear patch cloaks or be made to walk around without a full beard, visible signals that made him undesirable. Some sources say such men were forbidden to marry at all or found it nearly impossible. Even if they married, they could be taunted and their family scorned. In a way, the Spartan state turned honor into an aphrodisiac and shame into contraception. Then there were the not hoi, illegitimate or semi-legitimate children, and the mothakes, youths of lower status who sometimes entered the Agoge, perhaps helot or half-helot boys fostered by citizens. These categories hint at flexibility under pressure. A city at war needs men. Sometimes it would train and even later manumit helots, turning them into neodomodius, new citizens of kind, who could fight. But when it came to full reproduction of the homoioi, the line stayed narrow. Adoption occasionally solved heir problems. Elite men might adopt an heir to keep property and name intact. But adoption replaces, it does not enlarge. The citizen population's pool remains shallow, and shallow pools warm and go stale. Sparta also used colonization as a pressure valve. The story of the Parthenii, sons of maidens, sent to found Tarentum in southern Italy, is a tangle of myth and possible memory. Perhaps children of lower status unions barred from full legitimacy, perhaps born during the long Messenian Wars when many men were away. Some sources say these youths denied full civic place, rebelled, and were sent away to found a colony. If true, it is another example of the state managing reproduction by export, moving inconvenient bodies off stage to preserve the purity of the chorus. Meanwhile, helot families multiplied under duress. The famous or infamous Cryptia, a program in which select Spartan youths acted as a kind of secret police, stalking and sometimes murdering helots deemed dangerous, haunts this story. It's not breeding in the reproductive sense, but it is management of a population by force, a culling of perceived threats. If eugenics is selection and exclusion, the Cryptia is the knife's other edge. We breed our own carefully. We prune theirs violently. Plutarch and other sources differ on details, and some modern scholars see the Cryptia as a rite of passage more than a death squad, or as a complex institution with policing functions. But the function of terror is unmistakable: to keep helots in place so that Spartan families and their engineered offspring could exist at all. The net result across centuries was paradox. The more strictly Sparta guarded the gates of marriage and birth for its core citizens, the smaller that core became. By the time Thebes shattered Sparta's land power at Leuctra in 371 BCE, sources report that only a fraction of the old citizen numbers remained, 700 citizens, perhaps a mere 100 with land enough to be called rich. The closed loop was choking. Even a machine this strict breaks, especially when war, wealth, and time twist the screws. Numbers are not romantic, but they tell a love story in a death spiral. Early Sparta may have had around 8,000 to 9,000 adult male citizens. By the 4th century BCE, the number had collapsed. Aristotle called it oliganthropia, a shortage of men. The reasons were multiple: constant warfare, late marriages for men, dowry and inheritance patterns concentrating wealth, fine for bachelors that didn't solve the underlying scarcity, and perhaps the very breeding ideology that refused to widen the citizen pool. A program built to perfect turned out to be brittle. Some Spartans saw the problem and tried to solve it. In the 3rd century BCE, the reforming kings Agis IV and later Cleomenes III attempted to redivide land, cancel debts, restore equal citizenship numbers, and, by implication, repopulate the citizen body. They dreamed of resetting a system that had cannibalized itself. But their reforms ran into entrenched interests and political chaos. Agis was executed, Cleomenes fought and lost. The old breeding plan had locked the gates so firmly that even kings could not pry them open without breaking the city. In the meantime, the city improvised. It opened the Agoge to more non-citizens. It granted limited citizenships here and there. It used more mercenaries. Women, who held significant property, bore the weight of inheritance and reproduction, but could not alone reverse demographic decline. The marriage age rules, so proudly advertised by earlier authors as rational and healthy, could not deliver babies without men willing or able to marry. Fines for late marrying or for unwilling bachelors, if they were enforced, punished the symptom, not the disease. Consider, too, the psychological cost. A society that insists your most intimate choices are instruments of the state creates anxiety. If you're a young man who failed the Agoge's expectations, you're stained. If you're a young woman, you're eyed for your hips and your pedigree. How many secret griefs lived in houses with polished shields? How many miscarriages, stillbirths, failed matches, resentments at arranged rationality are simply not recorded? We can only imagine the human texture behind the numbers. The machine may have hummed with purpose, but it ran on beating hearts. Another inflection point came with the Theban liberation of Messenia in 369 BCE. The Helot base that fed Sparta's citizen class evaporated. Without this labor force, without its subject land, Sparta's great experiment lost the ground beneath it. The breeding plan depended on men having enough leisure to train and fight, on women managing households bolstered by Helot labor, on food flowing from fields worked by others. Remove that foundation, and the carefully curated lives of the equals wobble. The city survived, but as one more Greek polis among many, its aura dimmed. What about the famous military excellence that we're told all this sacrifice produced? The Spartan army was formidable for a time, disciplined, symbolically terrifying. But even at its height, Sparta could be outmaneuvered. Even in victory, it drew on practices other Greek states found strange or repellent. When decline set in, the army's reputation could not outrun demographic collapse. A sword is only as sharp as the hand that holds it. If that hand begins to tremble, to borrow the city's own word, the blade's shine cannot cut the air. It's tempting to draw neat lines. They tried eugenics, and it failed. Reality is messier. The Spartan program produced a reputation that lasted 2,500 years. Its successes were as real as the terror that sustained them. Its failures were as structural as the mountains that penned it in. The most honest thing we can say is this: Sparta's breeding experiments are best understood as a set of social and legal controls, some likely real, some embellished, that sought to make a small citizen elite durable in a dangerous world. In the end, they made it strong, then brittle, then broken. And yet the myth survived, because myths are easier to breed than people. Listen again to that first question. Did Sparta really inspect infants, permit wife sharing, and shape desire to make soldiers? Some sources say yes, in outlines if not in sensational detail. Others urge caution. The cliff at Taygetus might be a moralizing metaphor. The marriage customs reported by Plutarch may be part truth, part performance. What is clear is the intent: to make private life serve public power. The chilling lesson is not that Spartan babies were uniquely endangered, or that Spartan marriages were uniquely cold. It's that a society can, and did, turn birth into a tool. It can call this virtue. It can sing songs to make it sweet. But tools have handles. Whoever grips them decides the cut. If you found value in this quiet walk through Sparta's rooms, if you'd like more calm, careful journeys into the dark corners of history, consider subscribing, leaving a comment with a next myth or society you want us to unspool, and sharing this with a friend who loves a good story told softly. Until next time, sleep well. History keeps its vigil.